Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us in the next hour. My name is Stephanie McGarry, and I am the Chief Engagement Officer at SIG, and I have the pleasure of facilitating today's webinar. Today's webinar is entitled Services Procurement, Unlocking Value from Your Invisible Workforce, and it is being presented by SAP Fieldglass. Folks, these webinars are meant to be interactive, so please submit your questions throughout the presentation. There is a Q&A box on your webinar screen, so please fill in your questions there, and we will do our best to answer all of the questions during and at the conclusion of today's presentation. Before I proceed, I have just a few housekeeping items I want to cover with you. Many of you are familiar with SIG, and many of you are members, and many of you are also joining us for the first time. So I'd like to quickly cover just a few of the resources we provide. Our global events program is ever evolving. These events, they're more like mini summits. They begin at 9 a.m. and they conclude at 5 p.m. with a happy hour. Throughout our day, we have multiple practitioner presentations, panel discussions, educational classes, and more. So please check with the SIG website frequently for our upcoming cities and our current agendas. If you're interested in hearing about sponsorship opportunities, you could always reach out to me directly. Our webinar program. Today you are participating in our webinar program. These take place weekly on Tuesday and Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern, and all are welcome to attend. You can find out about our entire webinar list and a complete listing of our upcoming webinars, and also register today. Please remember, we house these webinars for up to 3 years for playback at any time. And again, just go to sig.org to find that list of information. SIG's peer-to-peer resource is also a fabulous opportunity that we offer here at SIG. These allow you to ask top-of-mind questions and get instant responses. You can ask them both to our members directly or to our providers or to our entire SIG community. It's a fabulous resource we offer here at SIG. In addition, we have our SIG Resource Center, and that is home to a number of tools, templates, white papers, RFPs, RFQs, research documents, these webinars, et cetera, and those are to make your job easier every day. We house over 5,000 documents in our SRC and are there for your convenience. Last but not least, we also have SIG's Career Network, and the network features job postings for sourcing professionals and internships in all levels of employment. So again, folks, please reach out to me or any other of our SIG members directly if you have any questions at all. One of the things I'd love to mention is we are happy to do a private member overview of benefits at any time you would like a refresher. We are also excited to announce that we have established these strategic partnerships for our SIG members to enjoy. We are thrilled to partner with GEP, the Everest Group, and SIG Innova. So again, please visit the partnerships page on our website under the membership tab for more information. I am also very happy to announce a couple of new partnerships that SIG has, including PeopleTicker. PeopleTicker is an incredible solution that will help you leverage market data to show savings and retention opportunities. It really is a very valuable, incredible tool that we are offering to you. In addition, SIG has also teamed up with Spend Matters to offer discounted access tailored solution map benchmarking-based services such as Accelerator, Insider, and Spend Matters Pro, another very valuable tool we are offering to you. SIG's Global Summits are semi-annual events with more than 350 people in attendance. The agenda is packed with keynote presentations, workshops, breakout sessions, and endless opportunities for networking. We also have a lot of fun in our entertainment in the evenings. The agenda and the event details for our Spring Technology-Focused Summit in Orlando is available on our website, and registration is currently open. We will also be offering our CPO and executive meeting as well as a millennial meetup on Monday evening, April 20th. So get yourself and your team registered today. As I previously mentioned, we are bringing SIG to you all over the nation. SIG's 2020 event dates are already set and being planned, so please refresh your memory and log on to sig.org events frequently for more information. And last but not least, SIG University offers training and development opportunities to people of all levels in their sourcing careers. We're currently enrolling for our next semester, and our programs begin on January 20th. We have some incredible new curriculum for both you and your colleagues, and I encourage you all to sign up. And now, for the reason that we've all gathered here today, today's presentation, again, is entitled Services Procurement, Unlocking Value from Your Invisible Workforce, presented by SAP Fieldglass. And at this time, it's my pleasure to introduce Brian Cicirello. Brian is a senior consultant in the Strategic Consulting Services, and as a member of the SAP Fieldglass Strategic Consultant Services team, Brian brings over 14 years experience in the external labor space to help SAP customers define and realize value within their external workforce and services procurement programs. Brian, I am truly honored to have you with us today, and we're all looking forward to what you have to share. So with that, I will turn the mic over to you so you can kick things off. Welcome again.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. The honor is all mine. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good day to you all. As Stephanie mentioned, I am Brian Cicirello. I work with SAP Fieldglass on trying to help the world run better. And today we're going to be diving into some research that we had conducted in collaboration with Oxford Economics, really looking at a segment of the workforce that is insanely prevalent and how it might differ from some traditional procurement approaches to managing it. We were very curious after our initial run of research the prior year focused on the staff augmentation space. What does the services procurement landscape look like from an executive level? And so we went back out to the street in an effort to get some information and some insight from executives the world over across 24 different industries and say, really, how do you view the people who are executing on your behalf, but that aren't within your regular, they're not on your payroll, and they're not within your traditionally sourced staff augmentation channel. So how is this space different from, say, even the procurement of material or direct material? And we're very happy to be able to talk through some of our findings and hopefully give you some ideas on how you can help your organizations procure better. So to get started, I want to talk a little bit about what the current world or what the world around us looks like nowadays, just to level set a bit. We all know we're in the 21st century now. We constantly see within the news that the digitization of the world around us is affecting us in new and exciting and in sometimes very scary ways. But we as representatives of our businesses are still charged with an age-old mission, which is how do we make sure that we are as profitable as possible? How do we make sure that we are spending our money wisely in pursuit of our company goals? And how do we make sure that we are taking advantage of some of these emerging technologies to do that better? The upshot of that is companies the world over are becoming hungrier and hungrier and hungrier for new and emerging talent types. So the fundamental landscape of the workforce is in many ways shifting. We have the specter of automation coming up in some, say, blue-collar spaces, even within some white-collar spaces. And we see new and emerging concepts like AI and machine learning and blockchain, which you've been hearing about now for months, if not years, and you're sort of still reeling as you're taking all of this in. So because these organizations across the world are transforming to thrive within this digital age, they're being forced to adapt their business models. That could mean the launch of a new digital channel. That could mean a change in how they go out to the talent market to bring in the people they need to execute. So we're looking at things like demand for specialist IT and digital skills as well. That is not the whole of what we'll be talking about, but it's one aspect of the changes that we're experiencing that we want to start talking through as an example. So what do we mean when we talk about the external workforce? If you would have asked me when I first started in staffing at a branch office in 2005, what do I mean by the external workforce? I'd be looking primarily at temp labor, right? The traditional non-payroll contingent staff augmentation. It goes by many names, but at its core, it is filling a position for an organization to execute a job role, okay? This marries up fairly well with your traditional payrollers, or your traditional payroll, sorry, don't mean to use a loaded term like payrollers, in that it's predominantly role-based. However, over the years, what we noticed is an increase in the number of, say, outsourced engagements, where you're asking other people or other firms to execute business functions and to drive business goals on your behalf. These service providers are typically engaged via an SOW. They may be party to a master contract with your organization that the procurement team has negotiated, but these are fundamentally still workers executing for your organization that do not belong to the organization. The way I like to sum this up is the external workforce is everyone who works with you who does not work for you. And this can be anything. If you used to run a call center internally, so you have a customer-facing unit, and you've decided as an organization to outsource that, every person staffed on your Tier 1 customer service desk belonging to that outsourcing firm is an external worker for your organization, whether they work for you or not. And so we really wanted to dive in here to this services procurement angle because it is so vast and it encompasses so many different skill sets, types of engagements, and it's really this gigantic, in some ways enigmatic piece of an organization's spend and a piece of an organization's talent profile. So why is this important? Because when you look at the breadth of the external workforce, increasingly executives are looking at the external workforce as a key driver of business performance. Depending on the industry in which you sit, you may very well rely on the external workforce just to keep the lights on and to make sure that your core business processes are running. For example, if you are a company with a heavy ag exposure, you may ramp up seasonally during harvest time. And this is really true of any seasonal-based work. Right now, we're within the holiday season. Most people look at an increase in seasonal retail hires during this time. Where we see it is within the retail and manufacturing sectors, there's a significant ramp up beginning in October to ensure that product and inventory is moved and delivered on time. Within health insurance, now it's open enrollment time typically near the end of the year. Those call centers and those enrollment agents need to be staffed up, but you're only going to need them for a short time. So from a health insurance perspective, you turn to the external workforce to augment that enrollment staff and make sure that you can operate at the capacity that you need. Surprisingly to me, when I looked at some of these findings, cost is not the primary driver, though it does remain a key driver. Since we're looking at this with through the lens of procurement, making sure that we have the best bang for our buck, so to speak, is sort of core to the mission of a procurement unit. We want to make sure that the money that is being spent by the organization is being spent intelligently, that it is compliant and controlled spend, and that we are ensuring that our end users have access to these proper buy channels easily so that we can effectively manage these costs. We don't want a bunch of contracts in drawers, and we don't want me picking up the phone and calling my friend's firm and saying, hey, I need three folks to execute this for me. I'll pay whatever it is and never let procurement know about it, right? So this cost concern is still key, and it's something that the executive audience and management audience we asked is still keenly aware of. I also want to talk a little bit here, though, about risk. So when we think about risk can take many forms. There is a fundamental risk whenever you have someone who does not work directly for your organization coming onto your site, having access to your people, having access to your facilities, and having access to your systems. That is one form of risk, and that is one form of risk mitigation that a keen eye towards your external workforce enables. There's also the concept of a brand risk for your organization, right? I'm going to take the concept of the outsourced call center from earlier. If you used to staff a call center and you've now outsourced that, you're giving up some form of control, right, over the direction, the training of those individual employees. However, when a consumer calls into that call center, that outsourced call center, they don't care that it's an outsourced call center. Your brand name is, and your brand experience is on the line for every interaction. We know just looking at the news, I mean, the evening news now is reporting on, you know, so-and-so tweeted this, so-and-so tweeted that, right? We have easy access to trumpeting our opinions to the world around us. And so there's a real risk to a brand here if there is not an eye towards rigorously managing those sorts of outsourced services. So really what we see here is the external workforce in and of itself, encompassing both the traditional staff augmentation but also the service providers, is really essential when an organization is looking to succeed. When we bring this back to the concept of digitization, we start looking at things like specialized IT skills. How are you within the procurement space supposed to know that you are properly engaging firms that can deliver on the promise of the new digital age? What information is available? How do we track this? Is this something as simple as ensuring that there is a line item match from an invoice to a PO, or does it go beyond that? I assert that it goes beyond that. I mean, when we think about this in terms of cash outflows, 42% of the amount of money an organization spends, on average, is spent on people who work with you but who do not work for you within that entire breadth of the external workforce. Tens or hundreds of millions of dollars of an organization's money for headcount and for talent management is spent within this space, which is why it behooves procurement to have a seat at the table here, right? And to ensure that there is cross-channel communication within the organization to make sure that everybody's getting what they need when they need it. So, what does all of this mean? Oh, let's see, that was a Zoom. There we go. What are we going to do about this? 4 key takeaways here, and I'm going to dive into each of these. You want to be able to see who these folks are and what the outcomes of their work are. You want to establish rigor around the engagement process for the services providers. You want to ensure that there is functional cross-channel collaboration within the organization. And then we want to look at how you within procurement can see how you're approaching this business concept in a different way. So without any further ado, let's talk about illuminating this invisible workforce. When we think about service providers, your mind may turn to things like your consultancies, again, like I said, business process outsourcing within a call center, any or all of the above, right? Each one of these providers is likely key to a component of the organization. And yet, the further up the chain we go, the less visibility we have into what is actually expected. So less than half of the executives polled have any information around contract terms. What are we responsible for in terms of payment? What are we expecting in terms of delivery? How do I tie these projects and the outcomes of these service providers to my overall internal rate of return? How does it marry to my internal staff and our overall corporate strategy, right? So it's not even just a matter of saying the CPO needs to know what the hourly cost for a business analyst is. We're not necessarily talking about it in those terms. But what we are talking about is the establishment of a proper feedback loop here so that procurement knows when it comes time for renewal if those terms are being met and even if they're being enforced. Look, we spend a lot of time, or you spend a lot of time on sourcing activities and on ensuring that we have a fair price for a fair outcome, but making sure that the end users within your organization are using them and then being able to funnel that information up to inform the overall spend strategy for the organization, these are important things that in many organizations are missing. And so when we talk about shining a light on this, it's a matter of making sure that we have the ability to effectively report on this information. I'm going to give you an example of this relative to things like the responsibilities relative to these contract terms. If you are an organization that uses a lot of time and material services, so say something like IT application development, right? You may have a project that began in 2012 that was estimated to take 6 months and be $500,000, okay? Well, it's now 2019, 7 years later, so you're now 14 times the length, right? But you're also at a total project budget of $3.5 million. And it just keeps going on and on and on and on and on because someone isn't necessarily looking at what needs to be delivered or what the expectations are. And we end up within the never-ending project, right? We are hoping by shining a light on this or by giving you the idea of really knuckling down on this and taking a look at how you're going out to the street to spend your organization's money, that you're doing it with an eye towards these concepts. One of the other items here relative to visibility, and this goes to the concept of risk, is do we know when we hire a consulting firm or when we hire someone for IT application development that needs pieces of our code, that needs access to our sites? Do we know that these folks have been properly vetted? Even if you're looking at this from a deliverable basis, right? I don't necessarily care about how much per hour it is or what the rate per role is. I'm only paying once I get to UAT. The people who are executing on this still have access to your IP or to your physical property. And so not having visibility into this population introduces some core risks within the organization. I want to talk a little bit about quality and then progress against certain milestones and deliverables, right? When we look at our vendor engagements, quality is in many ways sort of a nebulous metric, right? It should be a key performance indicator. How satisfied are we with the outcome? What measurable quantities do we have against the outcome we expected up front? And yet, as that information funnels up the chain, it's difficult for executives to develop a spend strategy that encompasses a certain vendor population because they can't see what the quality of those outcomes are, right? When I have to talk to somebody about obtaining a return on the investment in managing a services procurement program and ensuring that you have the proper breadth of category management when you have certain processes in place, quality is one of these concepts that is often bucketed into a soft save. But there is an actual hard cost, it's just difficult to quantify, when you have a poor quality outcome. I'm going to use a personal example, right? If you're a homeowner and you go hire someone to put a new roof on your house, the quality of that installation and the quality of that work product is absolutely key to whether or not you have to rip it off and replace it the next year. So now you've got a certain amount of cost sunk into a poor quality engagement up front. You're not going to necessarily hire that roofer, that same roofer back to fix the job the following year. But I mean, if you don't have that level of visibility within the corporate space, another unit within the organization may very well try to engage that same roofer to do something else for the organization without knowing that they've not delivered previously. And so even though it can be difficult to actually quantify in some instances, the concept of quality is really a major cost driver, or it is a major cost driver within the organization and has a dramatic effect on what dollars and cents, or really what money is available, I don't mean to be ethnocentric, on what money is available to execute on the organization's overall strategy. You may be able to redirect spend, for instance, to a new project or to a new vendor and just cut ties with someone who's not delivering if you can see what quality is there at point in time. This is where we marry in the concept of looking at progress against milestones and deliverables. Really, how close is this vendor to achieving success? What can I do? What could I do if I knew what the status of that particular milestone or deliverable is? Can I, in procurement, start partnering more closely with the business to say, hey, we have a 500,000 euro expenditure on this project, but we're still very far away from this initially defined milestone. What's going on? Is there a reason to keep spending on this, or can we redirect? Okay, so quality, though oftentimes looked at as a bit of a the softer side of savings, there is a real cost impact to the organization with it. So how are we going to do all of these? Action item number 2, and that's the concept of managing with rigor. So when we look at rigor or management rigor as a concept, we are looking at the service provider community and how an organization engages with them. What do we see as a result of this research cropping up as issues that need to be resolved or issues we can get in front of if we apply sufficient rigor to the process, right? So this is a further dive in many respects into the concept of risk and why it matters, why the who matters almost as much as the what or the how. Let's take a look at that first item, the concept of the digital security breach, right? I think we've seen generally in the news, there are those big ticket, big splash, very well-known brands having issues with a hacker going into the database and stealing 1 million user IDs or 1 million passwords, right? We're not even talking about that level of digital security breach. These can be very localized. These can be very small amounts of data relative to your personnel or your customers, but they're there nonetheless. I will give an example about this that comes out of the banking sector. We have a consultant who is engaged for a project, who has accessed a piece of customer information or a set of customer information or internal bank information to which they should not have had any access. We don't necessarily know what they're going to do with this. We generally don't care. The access in and of itself is problematic. And so we notify the vendor, hey, this particular consultant needs to be pulled off the project. Don't send them back to us, okay? Well, this particular consultant may have a very unique set of skills and get picked up by another vendor with whom you have a contract. If you don't have any visibility into any of the who, if you're not tracking how folks are onboarded and offboarded, it's very likely that that second firm could say, hey, this would be a perfect person to put on this project for the bank from which they were just let go or from which they were just asked to leave. Now you're reintroducing that risk. without any rigor within the program, if we're only looking at this purely from here are the pay terms, here's the cost, then now we have an actual risk of reintroducing someone who really shouldn't be on site back on site. Okay, we have the concept within the external labor market of misclassified workers, I guess I would call them. Many organizations have a tenure policy, okay, for their staff augmentation units. 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, somewhere along there, break in service, that person needs to break. And that's really in many respects an HR initiative to prevent co-employment. It's one tool in the bag to prevent co-employment. But what we often see in organizations that don't have sufficient rigor around this process is that person who's recently been disengaged due to tenure is then re-engaged. I call them the Monday morning consultant. They are now back in as an independent contractor the following Monday. They are back in under a service provider the following Monday doing the exact same thing they were doing before, and often at a less favorable rate than they were under their staff augmentation contract. So even looking at the concept of corporate policy compliance within the external workforce is key. There are plenty of workers who are hiding within the services procurement space that may be better served or are really staff augmentation workers and vice versa. Now, frankly, some organizations may look at this and say, I'm more outcome driven, it doesn't really matter, and that's fine. You can approach the external workforce that way, but you need to be cognizant of the concepts here of compliance. Make sure that those contracts with the services providers are ironclad and are outcome driven so that you remove some of that co-employment risk for your friends in human resources and so that you are truly delivering that outcome. This is a business decision organization by organizations, and so it's just something of which you really need to be aware. Everybody's favorite is Maverick Spend, right? And it's a little, well, I don't know about everybody's favorite, but it's a common concept, right? Within the external labor space, it is ripe for unauthorized spend. It is very simple for someone to not know, for a business user to not know that there is a proper buy channel when a service needs to be completed. That's true within staff augmentation. That's true within services procurement. And oftentimes, what we can see where there's no process or no buy channel enforcement in place is work has started with a firm that has not been properly vetted by the procurement team. It started 3 weeks ago. We've got people on site that we don't know. We have invoices coming in for a vendor that ostensibly need to be paid, but we have no terms around them. We don't know what the KPIs are. Do we get a discount with these? Nothing's been negotiated, right? Procurement spends a lot of time negotiating these contracts to the best benefit of the organization. So why not get an internal ROI within procurement on the work that's already been done by pushing some of that rigor out into the business and ensuring enforcement? There are various mechanisms to do this, and each organization is going to be somewhat different in how they approach it, but that doesn't negate the concept that this is fairly key. When we look at project life cycles, we can see that, in many instances, the concept of rigor may drop off over time. So procurement may, in some ways, have a seat at the table when we're talking about workforce planning. What vendors do we need to ensure that, certain talent strategies are properly enabled, right? Some of the times we are actually measuring against, what is the stated goal of the project. When we get down to the concept, though, of offboarding and re-engagement, that's where we start to see that significant drop. So you have, say, a large MSA with a consulting firm, right? It's a $10 million contract. They provide management consulting. They provide human resources and capital expenditure consulting, all different kinds of consulting, right? Over the life of that contract, on a project-by-project basis, they are going to be sending their personnel onto your site to access systems, to access personnel, etc. When the engagement is over, how do we know that that person's access to all of these various pieces is cut off? If you're not looking at it, if you don't have a process in place for that, then it's highly likely that that person may still have access to it. So this, in some ways, is still the concept of partnership, but there has to be process around that partnership. And that partnership may be with the security staff, with IT, whoever, the Active Directory managers, right, to ensure that certain digital access is cut off. That becomes key. Re-engagement, though, is really where I think there is some upside here. Let's talk about the roofer that I had, right? And I understand my roof might not be the best example for this because theoretically, if they do a good job, I don't need a new one for another 20 or 30 years. But I may recommend that roofer to my next door neighbor. So if we look at my neighborhood as the company, my next door neighbor is a different business unit and he needs a similar task done. Why don't I recommend someone with whom I had a very positive experience and we know is already vetted by procurement, has favorable rates negotiated or as favorable as possible, has defined payment terms, has the positive feedback so we can continue that loop. So I know within procurement whether or not I need to go to the street to find another vendor. And in my case, to find another roofer, to have my next door neighbor find another roofer. Wow, we are going down the roofing rabbit hole here. But I think you get my point, right? Why don't we, as organizations, we should want to use the people who deliver and do well for us. But if we don't have rigor within that space, we have a lost opportunity here for continued favorable outcomes. And to really, in some instances, develop a closer partnership with our vendor community. All right. Now comes the kumbaya, gather around the campfire and hold hands portion of the presentation. And this is where we look at a deeper level of cross-functional collaboration and rising above those silos, right? So much of what I'm trying to drive here as a result of our research is the concept of seeing what's happening, putting some frameworks in place to make sure it's effectively managed. And to do that, you can't do that from the procurement desk alone, right? There are certain items relative to this space that will require input from other departments. So if you're sourcing for a piece of technology, you need to know from IT if it's going to make sense to buy those licenses, if it's going to make sense to install a new set of servers within a data center, right? You're going to need to know from human resources, what are the talent needs of the organization over the next 3, 6, 12, 24, 60 months, and do we have the right vendor mix in place to deliver on that? Okay, so the strategy may be decided at the C-level. We need to, it almost always seems to come down to we need to spend less and do more. Okay, fair. How do we do that intelligently so that we make sure that we are using our well-negotiated contracts and that we are getting value for dollar? Teamwork, I hate to use a hackneyed phrase, but I'm always a fan of this one. Teamwork makes the dream work. So as a company, it is important to make sure that it's not necessarily just one group making these decisions. Okay, there's input needed from other stakeholders in order to drive effectiveness throughout the operation within this space. This could be anything from the development of a steering committee with key business users out in the business lines, with an HR stakeholder, procurement, IT. This could be an overall governance framework for the non-employee spend. I've seen this done a couple of different ways. And I think, to be frank, there should be a leading unit within the management of this space when it it comes to external labor, we often see roughly a 50-50 split between HR and procurement as far as who ultimately owns the program, with a smattering of IT or finance thrown in there. So I guess it'd be 49-49 and then 2. But just because one department is the primary stakeholder doesn't mean the other department gets left behind. So in driving buy-in for these concepts, we have to try to paint this picture of why it's important for people to participate in it. You know, any process is only going to be as good as the people who use it. So we want to make sure that they're accessible and will drive adoption. And one way to do that is to ensure that your end user community, for instance, has some input. Okay. This one, I think, is a big one. And in many ways, it goes not only to the establishment of that feedback loop, but also to, I don't necessarily want to say alleviating a burden on procurement, but towards really augmenting what you're able to deliver to the organization by getting better and more useful data out of this team. You need to know if you need another marketing consulting firm or not. You know, what's the key business driver from here? Partner with marketing to figure it out. Okay, last action. You, as a member of the procurement community, what is your contribution to all of this? And how can you see this in a new light? So I'm going to start this piece, right, with the concept of how well are our outcomes managed, right? When we look at our research, basically almost 60% of the executives polled indicate that their service providers are getting a B or less. Let me rephrase that actually. Of the executives polled, they said that 60% of the time their vendors are delivering at a B or less if we're looking at the old school grammar school grading scale. Only 41% of the time are we pretty much nailing it. Everything here, everything within, let's see, this space here essentially represents the potential for rework and additional cost in the organization. Why is this happening? This can happen for any number of reasons, some of which I've essentially mentioned, right? You have people out in the business that are bringing in vendors without a proper sourcing channel. Maybe it was a project that needed a bid and didn't get one. Maybe the end users didn't know that you already had a set of preferred vendors for a particular piece of business, right? This could be the never-ending project where it's on a pure time and material basis without any end in sight. And so you become prone to the sunken cost fallacy and say, well, I've already spent $2 million on this, and the vendor says they'll be done within the next 6 months. If only I can get another $500,000 on this. Well, there's no clamps on that. There's no guardrails on that. Because in another 6 months and another $500,000 later, they come back and say, well, it's really just going to take another 6 months and another $500,000 because they've already done it a few times. That's not to demonize vendors, right? I'm not trying to do that. But I see this time and again within the time and material space, right? This is after the first milestone is reached within a marketing project. How is the campaign really doing what I need it to do? Is the messaging on point? Do these marketing consultants get what I'm trying to do as an organization? You know, having some rigor around that and being able to really see that helps drive the success of the project, and then as an extension, it helps drive the success of the organization. Organizations are spending billions on consultancies, law firms, these marketing agencies, you know, outsourcing, all of these various service categories per year. Remember, 42% of your spend on the workforce is on the on your headcount is on the external workforce. This is really where procurement can make an impact by bringing their expertise into the equation and making sure that the organization is spending better, right? This in and of itself is in many ways an ROI driver. When you have these projects that are not meeting their goals and objectives, that is a drain not only on the cash outflow for the project and the work that was turned in that doesn't meet your goals and objectives, but someone internally may have to now pick up some of the pieces as well. There's an impact to the productivity of your internal employees around this. Someone's going to have to fix it, right? I'm going to have to get up on the roof with a tack hammer and a ladder, and I'm going to have to try to pound down a couple of shingles until I can get another vendor in there, for instance. Or I'm going to have to supervise the new vendor doing it and start over. So being able to say, hey, we in procurement can help by making sure that these buy channels are set category by category for key pieces of people-based service, people-based business, we can help contribute to the organization in this manner. It's a very different world when you're trying to essentially buy an outcome versus buying, direct material. Oh, I keep clicking the Zoom button. There we go. So, understanding that everyone, or I'm assuming here that most people are coming from procurement, and I was just touting how we can help contribute from the procurement department. I do want to stress, it's not just a procurement thing, okay? When we look at the emerging digital technologies and the digital transformations we're undertaking, when we're looking at the financial impact to the organization for the money spent on these services and ensuring good value for dollar, the external workforce, and specifically in this case, the very broad set of service providers any organization may engage, these service providers are key in baseline business performance. It's not just a matter of, hey, here's the contract. The contribution you're making is driving forward your organization's spend strategy, day in, day out, short term, long term. This goes beyond just making sure that those contracts are there. A lot of pressure is put on procurement to make sure that this all comes off without a hitch, right? But we can take this now and say, raise our hands and say, hey, we need more buy-in from the rest of the organization on this, right? These are key to how we're going to execute. If you have to go talk to the finance department or to shareholder relations for some reason or other, tell them that it's going to improve the earnings per share, because it will, right? We're affecting the income statement here by making sure that the cash outflows are better managed and that we're getting quality work for what we're spending, right? If all we focus on is does the PO match the invoice, we may not necessarily get to this level, right? We won't necessarily have the quality information. We don't necessarily have the risk mitigation that we need. But that can't all just sit on one desk, right? This, it takes a village to raise a company, I suppose is how I would say it. It takes a village to manage a company. But here, this is really where we're driving, is all of these various aspects will funnel into the organization's success. And it has to go beyond just expecting that because the contract is negotiated and there's a rate card in place, that everything is going to be hunky-dory. Having the visibility into those operational aspects that I've gone through is key, right? That feedback loop is going to pay dividends downstream. We see organizations that are looking at this. Let me back this up. There's an organization I have in mind where, looking at, say, spend by category and by type, they are starting to look at their expenditures in such a way that if they increase spend within within their service providers within a category, let's say they spend $5 million more over the past year within that category on service providers than they had the prior year. But they've been able to take out $12 million in cost for other talent channels or other staff augmentation channels. You're still at a net gain of $7 million. So instead of looking at the increase of 5 and the decrease of 12 separately, it's a matter of looking at this holistically as a true benefit to the organization. This is going to allow for a certain amount of mobility and agility within the strategy or the strategy formation for the organization, right? The more you see, the more you know. For those of us who are of a certain age, you remember after your programs as a child, you see the star go across the screen, and the more you know. Everything that came after that was positive, and it's the same here relative to how you're managing your services providers and your external workforce. The more you know and the more the people around you know, the better off you're going to be. And by people around you, I mean other departments within the organization. So I see that we're nearing the bottom of the hour, and I want to make sure that we have some time for questions. I'm going to throw up here for a bit a couple of quick check marks. Here's how you can approach your service provider community to derive more value from it. My next slide is basically going to be a thank you page and about the research with a link to downloading our full report. But at this point, I think, Stephanie, I think we're good for questions, if anybody happens to have any.
Perfect. Yes, we actually have 3 in the queue. And folks, feel free to ask additional questions, and we will try to get through all of them in our remaining 9 minutes or so. So the first question is, do companies who use a VMS for services procurement track hourly rates for statement of work, SOW work?
Absolutely. Yes. So let's unpack this a little bit. Sorry to use a very consultanty term, but we're gonna unpack this. When you negotiate an MSA for a T&M-based project or a T&E-based project, right, you have that rate card as part, it's a service master, okay? It's part of the contract. Organizations often, especially if they are time and materials heavy, will look to a roll rate cap for those engagements. So when you write a specific statement of work under that or for that vendor, you have your cap rates set. The other part of this too is this allows for comparison within a category amongst a key group of preferred suppliers to see who's giving you a good rate. It also lets you see, even though I might have a cap rate on my rate card for a certain role from a certain vendor, it's also going to let you see, things like comparisons for that same role throughout the organization from that vendor. So if Brian Cicirello Corp is supposed to give you a consultant at no more than 140 pounds per day, and I'm giving you a consultant at 140 pounds per day in a department, and then I'm giving you the same level of consultant, same type of consultant at 120 pounds per day in a different department, now you can start asking questions about why that is and see if you can negotiate a more favorable rate. There's that feedback loop. And how the visibility into that level of detail is going to drive some positive performance for the organization. So short answer, yes. It is fairly common to see rate cards in place on a time T&E/T&M type service.
Perfect. Thank you, Brian. All right, next question. Great presentation, but what am I supposed to do with all this? How do I get started on any of all of these concepts internally? For example, what would my Monday morning action be?
Yes. So Monday morning, what I want you to do is come into work. If you're a coffee drinker, grab yourself a cup of coffee, and then make a friend. This is an expansion on the rise above the silos concept, right? Go make a friend in HR, in IT, somewhere else within the organization where your services in procurement can be better leveraged. if we don't know what is happening, we aren't able to react to it, or we aren't able to get ahead of it, I should say, and we are always reacting to it. So go make a friend. I start with HR in this case because the overall talent strategy has an impact on what your sourcing activity may look like. Okay, do we have a proper set of preferred suppliers for staff aug? Do we have preferred suppliers within certain services-based spend categories that we want to make sure we are using? Within the talent strategy, what are we trying to acquire from a skills perspective, and is there something we can do to help source firms that will augment that? If HR is having difficulty finding, I don't know, Python coders, is there a way that you can get more value for dollar by engaging a services firm? Is there a way that you can offer up a sourcing activity to get a set of preferred suppliers there so that they can access some of these newer digital skills, right? And then through the various forms of vetting that you may do and that they may do and that whoever the end consumer of that talent is going to do, are you getting the right firms? Okay, so Monday morning, grab your coffee or your tea or your Coke or whatever, or your Coca-Cola or Pepsi or whatever, your soft drinks. Sorry, not an endorsement of any brand names I've just mentioned. Sorry for the colloquialisms. But grab yourself a drink and go. Make a friend.
Perfect. I like that. Okay,
Whoopsie.
last question here, Brian, and then we had an extension on to one of the earlier questions. So we'll try to get through these in 4 minutes. Most of our engagements are BPO straight outsourcing and are on a fixed fee. Why does the who matter at all when I have a fixed monthly cost?
Ooh, that's good. Yeah, so this is from the PO, like PO and invoice or matching kind of concept, right? Doesn't matter if it takes 1,000 people to do it or 10 people to do it. What do I care? Well, here's why we care. We're going to look at the call center example again, right? You want to look at things like SLAs for first call resolution. What is the turnover within that BPO organization for your account? How are they performing from a people basis to deliver the outcome that you need? So there are things like knowing, you may not necessarily need to know much in the way of specifics, right? You may not care about the rate that they're paying in this particular case, but you may care about how long people have been there. What are the qualifications? Are they certified to execute task A, B, C, or X, Y, Z for what we need them to do? So even on a fixed fee basis, you're basically pulling back or extrapolating one level of value for that kind of visibility. You want to see who on aggregate, or you need to be able to see who on an individual level in some ways so that you can get the aggregate of performance and then gauge whether that outcome is favorable to the organization. In this case, it's really a value for money play. Am I getting the $10,000 per month that I expected out of this particular service? I am getting escalated calls. So in the call center example, my second level unit, which is still internal, is still getting an inordinate number of calls transferred to them from triage and from first level. Where's the call resolution that I was promised? It's not there. And I'm paying you $10,000 a month for this? We need to talk. So there's still an aspect of this that applies very well to the concept of fixed fee.
Okay, perfect. And then in about 30 seconds, if we could expand on the very first question and be more specific in answering the question being about hourly rates for SOW with deliverables.
Yeah, if it's a pure deliverable SOW, I do still see some organizations capturing some form of rate. Why? In some cases, it's buyer preference to make sure that they have data available for benchmarking purposes, to make sure that they're getting the level or the skill level of employee that they were expecting. If it's not a driver, it's an extra data point. One thing I do see, though, beyond rates is hours tracking for deliverable basis projects. So you may want to know how many hours it takes. Let's look at something, and I'll try to be brief on this. If you have an enterprise that has, say, a multi-ERP setup, you've got a regional ERP for North America, EMEA, APJ. You go out and you buy an updated ERP, and then you hire a single systems integrator to do all three, right? You would expect that the number of hours, or I would expect that the number of hours needed to do the rollout diminishes over time as they become familiar with me as an organization and with the solution that I've purchased. That's one example of where I would want to at least track hours. I do still see some folks do rates, but if it's not a key billing driver, it's just a point of information. And it's a point of information that can be shared then relative to the overall talent cost, the talent cost potential for an organization. If you want to start hiring those Python developers, what are we getting? At what rate are they being charged for our services? Can we reverse engineer a suitable pay rate from that? So it can be a contributing piece of information.
Perfect, Brian. Thank you so much. And folks, if you have any additional questions, please know that you can reach out to Brian directly, and he will get back to you as soon as he can. So with that, today we are concluding today's webinar. And Brian, thank you again for sharing all of your insights with us. It was a fantastic presentation. And folks, we have already pushed out a PDF copy of the slides. So please just click on the link on your WebEx screen to download it, and it'll go straight to your desktop. And also, please keep an eye out for the follow-up email you will be receiving tomorrow. It'll include a link to the recording of this session. And thank you again, Brian, and the SAP Fieldglass team, and everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. It was a fantastic hour together.
Yes. Thank you for the opportunity, Stephanie.
Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Cheers.